and good evening, everyone. Welcome to our event tonight. Thank you very much for joining us. Tonight, as the nights are drawing in, we can hopefully bring you a little cheer and a spark of brightness to your evening. So again, thank you for joining us. This evening's event is being run by the Manchester Science and Philosophy Group, which is the name for the Manchester-based group of Christians in Science. My name is Gavin Merrifield, and I am one of the committee members here in Manchester. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with Christians in Science, we are an organisation that brings together those who are interested in healthy and positive interactions between science and Christian faith. Through events such as tonight's, we try to support those with a personal or professional interest in this area. You may be a scientist, a theologian, a teacher, a student, perhaps even a church minister, or simply just interested, but we will hope you will find tonight's discussion helpful and of interest to you on your own journey of faith. You can view our past events on our YouTube channel, where you'll also soon be able to find a recording of tonight's event. If you'd like to know more about us or to become a member or a friend of CIS, then please check out our website at www.cis.org.uk. Tonight I am delighted to welcome the Rev Dr Justin Tomkins, who will be speaking to us shortly under the title Voices on Technology, a survey he conducted of Christians in our churches who are involved in science and technology-based professions and what their perspectives and skills might offer to help build up the church. I remember filling in this questionnaire myself and being impressed with both the questions asked and also the enthusiasm within them to engage with science professionals in our congregations. Sometimes I guess we can maybe feel a polite separation between our church lives and our professional lives, especially so in the sciences. So I'm looking forward to what Justin has to tell us tonight about better ways forward on this.
Hi Gavin, hi all of you. Thanks for letting me join you this evening. I'm delighted to have a chance to both share something about the survey work that I've carried out over the last 18 months and then to particularly to interact around that. And I'm aware that a number of you, like Gavin, may well have been part of the surveys which went into producing that report. So thank you to all of you who were a part of that. Something very briefly about myself, first of all. I'm a parish priest in the Chelmsford Diocese. Moved here to North Essex on the border with Suffolk and Cambridgeshire about a year ago now, where I'm working in two small Anglican churches. Before that, I was based in a larger church in Poole on the south coast. And alongside all of those things, I've continued my interest and passion for science. So my background is as a scientist. My PhD was in chemistry, borderline with biology, working with DNA. I did a bit of research and a bit of teaching in secondary schools on all of that. And when I was preparing for ordination, I had an opportunity to just draw together some of that scientific background and the theology that I was immersed in at the time, and had a chance to research human enhancement and wrote a book on that when I just studied my curacy in Dorset. And since then, I've just been trying to work out, where do I go next with that sense of call to engage with issues of faith and technology. And this project report, Voices on Technology, came out of a conversation that I had with a friend 18 months, 2 years ago now. He was somebody in the same church where I was worshipping, an engineer. And as we walked together, he was telling me about the work that he was doing involved with infrastructure for electric vehicles. And I recognized that I knew that he'd worked as an engineer for a particular company, but I'd never heard the detail of what he was doing before. And it just struck me afresh what a goldmine there is in all of you who are working professionally in science or medicine or technology and worshipping at local churches. And there's so much richness in the experience of Christians engaging at those professional front lines that the rest of us don't always get a chance to hear about. I'm just going to step back for a second, and then I'll tell you about what happened next with the project. So since writing my book on human enhancement, Better People or Enhanced Humans, I was working out what do I do next? How do I broaden this out to something which is beyond the particular area of medicine that looks at how do you go not just to healing the sick, but to going beyond that, and how as Christians might we want to question some of the visions behind that. And 3 books particularly stayed with me. One is Ray Kurzweil's Singularity is Near, which I read back in probably about 2007, a couple of years after it came out. And that had a profound effect upon me. I know that many of you will have read that, I'm sure. And what struck me by The Singularity is Near, that I was both appalled and fascinated by what Kurzweil was saying at the same time. So I wasn't attracted to the vision of the future that he presented, in which we might upload ourselves into a computer system. But I thought that he had an amazing ability to help me address some of the possibilities of what will happen in the future if there's continued exponential developments in technology for any period of time. Another book that has had a real influence upon me is the book Most Human Human by Brian Christian. And Brian Christian is a journalist who was part of the 2009 Loebner Prize, a Turing test, in which a number of bits of software compete against one another for the prize of the most human computer within that particular Turing test. But there are a number of people like Brian in that 2009 competition who are the humans who are also part of that test. And as the bit of software which does the best job of fooling the judges into thinking it's human gets a prize for the most human computer, so the human that is most easily recognizable as human gets the most human prize. And Brian Christian won that 11 years ago. And as he wrote that book, Most Human Human, he was provoking me to think that in this age of technology, how can we not just mimic machines ourselves, but be increasingly human, not relinquish territory to machines when they start to mimic us, but how can we look to Jesus as the ultimately most human, and how can we be inspired to be more human ourselves? The third thing that I want to name, I'm sorry, wasn't a book, I said it was, but it was actually a Christians in Science meeting in Bristol that I went to in autumn of 2018, I think it was November time. And the Bishop of Oxford, Bishop Stephen Croft, was speaking there. Some of you will have heard him on that occasion. And you may remember that he said that there was a spectrum of technology and AI from the Terminator robot at one end to the Tesco club card on the other. And it's always stayed with me that he said we can spend too much time thinking about the Terminator robot and not enough time about the Tesco club card, and the way that in a less dramatic way technology affects the world around us. So all of that was just going around in my mind after I'd had this conversation with the engineer friend. And I thought what I'd love to do as I carry on my own reading and writing in this area is to try and reach out to a whole number of Christians who are working on these different technological front lines. So I recognised that through Croxford's directory, I could contact A lot of clergy within this country, in the Church of England, through the email addresses that they gave to Crockfords. And so one by one, I emailed a number of clergy. It went on to be about 3,000 eventually after a 9-month period. And I would, one by one, contact these clergy and say, I wonder whether you'd invite any scientists or medics or technologists that you've got in your congregation to fill in this survey. And I'm going to read out the questions on that survey. So first of all, I wanted to check if they were involved in science, medicine or technology themselves, and then to ask what area they were working in. And I listed AI, communications, education, energy, engineering, healthcare, IT, research, robotics, transport, other. Ask people to give a job title or professional role, and then ask them to engage with these questions. So what aspect of your work do you see as being most valuable for society and why? If possible, can you name a significant ethical question raised by your area of work which society needs to consider? How would you like the church to be praying for your area of work now and in the future? How do you see your area of work developing in the next decade? How do you see your area of work changing society in the next decade? Are there other comments relating to your work that you think it would be helpful for the church and society to consider as we look towards the future? And then I said, do you see yourself as having a Christian faith? Do you currently worship at a local church? Do you have a leadership role there? And then please indicate which of these issues relating to faith and technology are of interest to you. And I named church teaching on these issues, employment, unemployment, environmental issues, ethical decision-making in society, legal issues, medical issues, prayer for those working in these fields, and other. And so as I started to send out those emails to clergy in the summer of 2019, I started to get these responses. And by the spring of this year, in February, March time, I'd had about 600 responses from scientists, medics, technologists, and about 350 people had completed the survey. There are a few of those who were church leaders or others, but weren't working specifically in science, medicine or technology. But there were 315 people working professionally in those fields who had completed that survey work. And of those 315, 313 said that they had a Christian faith. 307 of them indicated that they currently worshipped at a local church. So when within the work, within the report, I referred to Christians, I was speaking about all of those 315 who had responded to an invitation from their local church to complete this research. And as I looked at all of the information that I got back, I felt that there were 10 lessons that I was learning as I read through this survey work. So what I want to do briefly is just read those 10 lessons to you, and then I'll say a little bit about each of those 10 before I invite Gavin to join us and we can explore that a little bit more. But these 10 lessons, as I saw them, were that Christians were working across the breadth of technological, scientific and medical front lines. Christians can articulate the awesome and inspiring value of their work for society. They're experiencing complex ethical challenges raised by their work. They're very open to having the wider church pray for their technological workplace. Christians can give our wider society glimpses into our possible technological future. And for us, the wider church, we've got this amazing untapped resource within our midst through all of you guys who are working at these front lines. We've got an opportunity through listening to what people are saying from these front lines to develop our prayer life. We've got an opportunity to teach into these areas, to equip for ethical decision making in society, and to engage in other ways. So that was a summary. That was what I felt had struck me, and I'd just spend a few moments, if I may, saying a little more about each of those lessons. So first of all, across these different front lines, I know that within churches, we'll often have those who are involved in medicine in one way or another as a part of at least larger congregations. And we know that education is another profession that is particularly named as a value within the church. But what I loved was that it wasn't just doctors and nurses and teachers and university professors who were saying that, yes, I'm working at one of these front lines. We had a lot of engineers, 59 engineers. We had 56 people who said they were primarily working in IT, 25 within energy, 22 within communications, 20 in AI, 12 in robotics, 10 in transport, and then 60 in some other area that didn't come into one of those categories that I'd named. And I loved the fact that as a church, we were engaging with all of those different areas. Not all of those may get prayed for as often within intercessions on a Sunday morning, but there are Christians around the country, on the 315 who completed my survey. I know it's just a very small sample of that, but even in that 315, there's this vast array of different frontlines that people are engaged in. Then in terms of the roles that people were working in, there's a real spread with people engaged in those different workplaces in all sorts of different ways. One of the things that struck me was that there seemed to me to be a lot of people in senior leadership in one way or another. There was a massive mix, but it covered a lot of leadership roles where I thought, wow, what a privilege it is that the church has all of these different people making such an impact in these different areas. And as I then read what people were saying, felt most valuable to them in terms of their contribution to society, I felt close to tears on a number of occasions. I was very moved by the way that people were expressing what they were doing and the sense that they had of the worth of that. And I'd expected that there would be lots of people who could articulate that very clearly in terms of caring for the sick, educating young people, but I was very moved by the passion with which people spoke about responding to a God-given sense of call in relation to all sorts of fields, caring for the environment in different ways, energy use and engineering, AI, robotics, and it was a privilege to see the way that people were taking so seriously the worth of what they were doing. I won't read out quotes for now. The report is available on the Christians in Science website and in other places. So I won't read quotes now. But the third lesson that struck me was about people experiencing complex ethical challenges raised by their work. And there were some things there around very specific areas to those who were using animal research in what they were doing. Medics involved in end of life ethical questions, start of life ethical questions, those sorts of things. But again, there was a real variety of different areas. I'll just read out some of the headings for you. So medical areas, start and end of life, AI and data, finances and making medicine available to people. So sorry, I'm muddled. They weren't all in medicine. This is the overall thing. Start and end of life, AI and data, finance and how resources are made available, which includes medicine, climate change, energy and the environment, and other issues that came up, genetic manipulation, welfare of farmed animals, and a theme that struck me within IT as a whole, just our always on, always connected society. Well, I want to say something about prayer, because when I asked the question, how would you like the church to be praying for your area of work now and in the future? Of those 315 respondents, then I think it was 306 people said, they gave some response. 2 people said not applicable. 1 said, I'm not sure if that would be of help. 4 said yes. They didn't say how, but they just said yes. 1 said, okay, you can pray for me. Another said, any prayer is useful. And then 3 commented on the question that it was interesting to be asked that question. But everybody else, so what's that, over 290 people, gave a prayer request. And the diversity of those prayer requests, again, was something that I found staggering, that the vast majority of people who responded to the survey said, yes, I want the wider church to be praying, and this is an area that I want people to be praying for. Some of the things that they asked for in overall areas, themes that came up, a lot of people asking for wisdom, a lot of people asking for strength in the workplace, a lot of people asking for compassion, particularly those in medicine, working with patients, but others to do with compassion with others within the workplace. And the technological context of today's workplace was something else that a lot of people were asking for prayer for. The fifth of the lessons that came up for me was about glimpses into our possible technological future. And what struck me there was that as a society, we engage with the future through science fiction, through movies, through the news, through talking to one another. Here were 315 people on different professional front lines who were saying, actually, we've got different insights into what the technological future will be like because of the work that we're doing. And these are some of the things that I'm thinking about, and these are some of the glimpses that I think they give to others. And again, it just struck me what richness we have within the body of Christ, as there are all of these different insights and experiences which we have available to us if we just talk to others within our congregations. Some of the themes, and this is where there are some subheadings within healthcare. So within healthcare, the issues that these professionals were saying they thought would be a part of shaping the future: patient responsibility, personalised medicine, pressure on healthcare through politics, through finances, through unrealistic expectations of patients, possible antibiotic resistance, new medical technologies and their consequences. And then beyond healthcare, these were other areas that came up very often: climate change, energy and the environment, data, AI and communications, robotics, automation and unemployment, transport. Food came up in a number of different ways, and then other social issues. So those are the 5 key lessons that came out of what those professionals were saying. The next 5 I'll just refer to very, very briefly, but it left me thinking that in the light of all of that, we, the wider church, have got some opportunities. There's all of these insights that we can tap into if we ask. There are a lot of people saying that they'd love us to be praying for them. We've got an opportunity to teach into these areas. So in relation to that question, please indicate which, if any, of these issues relating to faith and technology are of interest to you. 60% of respondents said that they were interested in church teaching on these areas, which felt significant to me. It felt as if even the professionals were saying, we haven't engaged with these areas as a church in the way that we'd like to. We'd be interested, even as experts, in having church teaching on these areas. And I think that I'd assume that it would be helpful for those professionals to be a part of shaping that teaching. But I also heard in the responses a sense of humility within those professionals saying, actually, together as a church, we'd like to learn about these areas. And then 68% said that they'd be interested in churches engaging more with ethical decision-making in society. 56% of respondents said that they'd be interested in engaging in environmental issues within our churches. And then 46% said they were interested in medical issues, 45% in prayer for those working professionally in these fields, and then 20% were interested in engaging with issues of unemployment and employment that would come up through these new technologies. Legal issues were also named. So we've got an opportunity to teach into these areas. We've got an opportunity to engage with some of the ethical decision making, and there are other ways that we can engage too. I hope that was okay, something of an umbrella, just to give you a sense of what the report was about, if you haven't already read it. And I hope that that might prompt us to engage through some Q&A now. Gavin, are you happy to join me and to take us forward as you'd like to?
Yes, I am. Thank you for that, Justin. That's absolutely fascinating stuff. It's such a broad range of topics that those responses have touched on. It's quite hard to know where to begin. It was fascinating to hear about what motivated you and what brought you to that. That was going to be my first question. So thank you for answering that one already. But one question I had maybe is like, out of your survey results, what are the key topics that you think might be of most interest to the church to be teaching on, that might have come out from the survey perhaps over the next 5, 10 or 20 years? It's easy for us to think what's the next Alpha course, the next mission course, but thinking strategically further ahead, what do you think we should be paying attention to?
I think there are so many possibilities, Gavin. And actually one of the things that I didn't say, but maybe worth mentioning, is that another route to this project for me were a number of sessions that we had in the church in Poole that I was a part of. And during 2017, we invited anyone who wanted to within the congregation to meet together to explore issues of faith and technology and science. And we had a number of doctors within the congregation there. We were based next to the local hospital. And so we had some scientists from the hospital, some doctors in the congregation. And we ran a number of events, including a medical panel where people in the congregation could quiz the doctors and others involved in healthcare on their professional experience. We had a behind the scenes tour of the hospital. So that's a long-winded way of saying that I think that different churches can simply engage with who are the scientists who you've got in your own congregation, or if you're, as I am at the moment, a part of a very small church, who are the scientists who are attending churches nearby, who maybe you could get together to do something within local areas. So I do think that education and medicine throw up all sorts of fascinating areas to explore and to pray into. And I think the church has already been good at engaging with some of those areas, at least to some extent. But I think that there are so many engineers within our congregations as well. There are people who are developing AI, who are involved with robotics. All of those areas are significant for our lives in the next decade and beyond. And I think we just need to find out who is it who we've got nearby, whose experience we can tap into. And actually all of these areas are fascinating.
Yeah, I quite agree with that. Where do you think we could possibly have the most influence for good? So if there's a technology that we might find particularly worrying, perhaps from a Christian perspective, but maybe not dismiss it entirely, but where do you think we might have the most influence there to turn it to a better outcome, as it were?
I don't know, Gavin. I think that's a good question. I think my sense at the moment is that I'm a part of a church in which I think it's really important that we engage with these issues, whether or not society listens to us. I think sometimes I feel more hope-filled than other times in relation to what influence do I think we may be able to exert. And I love the work that Tear Fund and other organisations do in terms of lobbying, in terms of care for the poor. So I do think that in this area too, something can be done in terms of lobbying. But I think it's important for us as a church to be engaging with these things, whether or not anybody else in the world listens to us and whether or not it makes a difference. And I kind of think that if we're praying for one another, if we're talking to one another, God will do something with that. And I'd love it if that's a part of being salt and light in society. There's one thing that I think that we've got, which the rest of society needs, and that's a deep understanding of what it is to be human. And I think that the church has been wrestling with that for years and years. And if the rest of society is to be able to grapple with some of these technological issues, on the basis of the reality of how God's made us and what it means to be human, then I think that that's one of the gifts that we can do if we are part of conversations in society and just in as accessible a way as we can, offering something about Christian understanding of what it is to be human and how amazing that is, and that we worship God who is fully divine and fully human.
Yeah, certainly in the AI literature, there's a lot of discussion about personhood and what it means to be human. And reading that, I've always thought you should check out the last kind of 2,000 years of Christian theology, and beyond that, other religions as well. There's a lot of resources there that people could be tapping into, and at the moment they're largely ignored. So,
and I think that in a way, those of us who have been immersed in those ideas may have forgotten quite how significant they are. And it's only, I guess, when we see society living according to something different, then it might strike us, wow, we've got a real richness that we could have to offer into some of these conversations.
Indeed. We've got a few questions from the audience coming in.
Okay.
Okay, so a very practical question, set of questions at first. Were you disappointed in the number of responses that you had to your survey?
I wasn't, to be honest. I was interested. You'll have noted through the numbers that I gave that for every 10 clergy I emailed, on average, I ended up with one scientist who completed a survey. But I really didn't know what sort of response I'd get. And whilst it took me a lot of time emailing clergy one at a time, it wasn't a difficult thing to do. I know that clergy are busy. I know that there are a number of clergy who won't have had scientists within their congregations. I think what kept me going was the richness that came from those people who did complete the survey, because it's not the easiest survey to complete, because it wasn't all yes or no buttons. It actually was asking people, what's an ethical issue that you'd want to name? How would you want us to pray for you? What glimpse of the future can you see? So I recognised that in people's busy lives, actually each person who completed this work was giving me a real gift. And that encouraged me over the period of 9 months just to keep pinging off these emails to clergy. And I got used to the fact that, okay, every 10 is going to give me a rich survey response.
Yeah. A 1 in 10 response is actually pretty good, I think.
Okay.
And then, I think just raising the issue with clergy, even if they did nothing more with it, it puts it in their head as well. I think
that's true. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. Are you aware of any comparable studies that have been done similar to your survey, and how might they compare?
It's a good question. I don't know, actually. I really don't know. I'm not aware of anything. If anyone is aware of something, I'd be fascinated to have a look at it. I mean, I'm sure that there will be all sorts of people in different congregations who have got to the heart of what this is about and asked the scientists in their congregations, what's your experience in these things? How can we pray for you? But I guess that there are also a number of local churches where that's not going on as much as we'd like it to. And yeah, I don't know whether anybody else has done a comparable survey.
I think there's been some large scale surveys done by, I think it's Elaine Auckland over in America.
Okay.
Tried to do big science and religion surveys all around the world, but I don't think she's been quite as UK based or as specific about interactions with churches as your survey. So it's a nice set of data to go along with that, I think. We have another question. Church leaders in the main aren't excited about science and technology, maybe seeing it as a distraction from evangelism and discipleship. How can we tactfully raise enthusiasm?
I think that one of the things that struck me is what richness there is in the different stories that we have from our professional front lines. And all of you who are engaged with science or medicine or technology, I think have got fascinating stories to tell. And so I can imagine that there are all sorts of church leaders out there who would be fascinated if they could hear some of those stories. But without hearing them, many church leaders will feel like, okay, I've got to work at this, I've got to nurture people in the congregation, I've got to care for the community, I've got to take baptisms, weddings and funerals, I've got to help with the local church school, I've got to care for the building. And I think it's understandable that a lot of those people won't be initiating something to do with faith and technology. But I think that if with church leaders, with house group leaders, with others in our churches, we can share these stories, then my sense is that we capture the imagination of others. And whether that's a church leader directly or somebody else in the congregation, it may spark something that then grows, whether it's a Zoom meeting within a local church, where a couple of engineers in the congregation get to share stories about their workplace, what they're wrestling with, their questions for the future, and people pray for them. But for me, it's the stories that hold the key. And I think that we've got to be gentle with church leaders who have got different things on their plates, but I think that if church leaders hear these stories, they'll recognise what an untapped resource there is here, which can be part of growing churches.
Good. Yeah. We have another question. The Pope's recent encyclical refers to the parable of the Good Samaritan. Can technology be considered something of a Good Samaritan today? If so, how? That's a great question.
Can technology be considered as a Good Samaritan? The only way that I don't know, I don't feel that I've got very much to offer in relation to that, I'm afraid, but it does spark one thing, and that's conversations that I've had with others about the way that we treat technologies which seem as if they have human qualities, even things like Siri and Alexa. And I think there's something from the parable of the Good Samaritan that says it's not so much about, is that person a neighbour to me, so much as how can I be a neighbour to somebody else, whether or not I can clearly know whether they are a neighbour. It's like the onus is on me. So I think there's something within parable of the Good Samaritan and technology that would say, if I treat a humanoid robot inhumanely, it may nurture something within me where I'm more likely to treat a person inhumanely. So in all of these questions about AI, robotics, having human qualities, I wonder whether it's good for me to treat those machines as if they might be a neighbour, because then I preserve some humanity within myself. But I think that's a complicated area, and I've heard some people say that it would be more helpful to us as people if robots weren't humanoid, and if we didn't have that muddle between machines behaving like people. But it seems to me that we're increasingly in a world where machines and objects will have human characteristics, which does raise questions about how do we behave towards them. So sorry if that's too far off the point.
Please keep your questions coming in. I was very interested in how you were describing kind of science and technology professions as the front line. It's very similar language to how in my own church we are talking about mission at the moment. I was wondering how we might encourage people in our churches to embrace careers in science as a calling to a potential frontline from the perspective of both evangelism, but also very kind of practical outworkings of the mission of the church. So we're talking about the environment, medicine, developing new drugs. What kind of strategies might be used to prompt people towards those kinds of careers?
Well, my use of the word frontline is very much indebted to LICC, London Institute for Contemporary Christianity. And I love the way that they equip us in local churches to recognise the goodness of what God is doing in all of these different front lines. And I think that those of us who have got a real passion for science share a sense of call to one of those very particular areas of front lines. And I think that, as I've said before, the church has already done a good job of valuing medicine as a call, valuing healthcare in wider ways, valuing education as a sense of call. But what was so moving for me in these surveys is to hear the stories from all of these Christians who have got a passionate sense of call within engineering, within AI, within energy, within transport. And again, I think that if those people within our churches are telling their stories to teenagers, then teenagers who are thinking about what am I going to study when I get off to university, is engineering something that I can offer to God as a sense of call, then I think that if we can let those teenagers know, yes, absolutely, those gifts that you've got in maths and physics, they open up so many powerful ways for you to make a contribution within society. And God is so interested in those things. I think those teenagers need to hear those who are a generation or two beyond them speak about what God is doing through them. I think they need to hear people praying within churches for engineers and for those involved in robotics. And I think the more that we speak to one another and we affirm and we value these things, the more that new generations will feel that they can follow God into these areas.
We've just had 3 teenagers in our own church go off, one to study robotics, one to be a dentist, and one to be I think it was a mechanical engineer,
Awesome.
which is absolutely fantastic. So it's great to see that these things can happen.
And don't LICC do a brilliant job of helping move that conversation forward?
Yeah, I was trying to remember where I'd heard the expression. I think we did one of the LICC courses last year in church and small group. We have another question come in. Do you think ethical teaching for specific areas of science will be highly specialised and beyond the competence of many clergy without specialised study? Or is it sufficient to teach basic ethical principles and principles for application and further reading and connection with other Christians with such a background?
I think there's something here which is very, very much about partnership. So as I tried to describe earlier on, I had a sense of humility within the experts who were filling in these surveys, who I sense were saying that they were open to being taught within local churches and being equipped in relation to ethical decision making within local churches. But I think that the way that we will most effectively teach into these areas and equip for ethical decision making is if there's a real sense of partnership between the professionals in science, medicine and technology and those who have been trained in theology and ethics and philosophy and some of those fields. And the more that we can come together and wrestle with these issues together, then the more that I think we'll be able to grapple with the core issues and together get a sense of how we might live in the light of them. And I think that these are complex areas, and it may be that if there's a couple of church leaders within one particular church and a few scientists come together and put on a course together, they may not agree with one another on the outworking of that. And different people in the congregation may think, oh, okay, I've got some insights from there, I'm informed, but actually I disagree with what so-and-so was saying. But nonetheless, if we're wrestling with these areas, then I trust that God will work through us and he'll help us at least work out, well, how do I need to live in the way that these impact my direct life? But I would very much say it's got to be partnership between those who are facing these front lines and those who can really say, okay, well here's how the Bible illuminates that, here's what Christian tradition has taught over the last few hundred years, those sorts of things together.
I think that partnership point is very important. We are living in a great time, as it were, for science and faith discussions. If you go back 20, 30 years ago, maybe it was perhaps very limited, but now we have great organizations like Christians in Science, we have the Faraday Institute, there's the Equipping Christian Leadership in an Age of Durham, in an Age of Science up in Durham, There are a lot of people here, especially in the UK, who could partner with churches and point you in the direction of good resources as well as all the resources in our own churches as well. I think if you dig under the surface, you'll be surprised at how many people in our churches actually have science backgrounds or are engaged in technology. I've certainly been surprised in churches I've been in, and it's been quite an encouragement.
I said that we did some work on science and faith in Paul in 2017. That was funded by that project in Durham, equipping Christian leadership in an age of science. And I love what they're doing. Well, one of the things that was fascinating to me about those discussions that we had in Paul's 3 years ago now was that we didn't set out to teach anything. We simply set out to grapple with some issues together. And a lot of it ended up in the whole area of medicine and healthcare. But through having a number of people working professionally in that area, we discussed things together, and we quizzed some of those people about their workplace, what God was doing there. And I think that if people say we want Christian teaching in this area, it can be as simple as starting with, well, let's talk about these areas together. I don't think we need to know the right answers in advance. I think if we talk to one another and explore, actually we can get to some quite fascinating conversations.
Yeah, I think that starting conversations is what's needed, because there is an air of tension maybe about science in churches, but if you start to talk to people, that tension soon goes away because people are interested in science. So in some ways, science in the church is maybe a front line that we're doubly core to, the front line of being out in our work environments, but also being in our churches. And we maybe need to be a bit bold in both of those areas.
Yes. Yeah. And again, find a partner. If there's a church leader who's not a scientist who you can partner with, then maybe it helps make that accessible, that the more that we can have some allies to help us share our stories.
Yeah. So we're coming up to 8 o'clock, so I think we'll start to draw things to a close. So one final question for Justin. What is your take-home message in maybe 1 or 2 sentences?
Just what a privilege it is to be a member of the body of Christ, that God is doing awesome things in each of us. And again, I come back to that conversation that I had with a friend that triggered this project in the beginning. We worshipped at the same church for a couple of years or so. We had a number of conversations, but it was only on that walk that I really got to know the detail of some of the things that he was engaging with within his workplace. And we've all got these stories to tell. And those of us who are a part of this Zoom gathering this evening have all got this shared passion for science. And there are amazing stories to share from within the areas of science and medicine and technology. But in a wider way, God is doing awesome things within all of us in our local churches. And the more that we talk to one another, then the more that we can learn from one another, we can celebrate what God is doing in other people, and we can pray for one another. So what a privilege it is that we're connected to one another through following Jesus.
Definitely. Thank you very much. So yes, thank you to Justin for presenting to us tonight. I think it's very exciting to think about the positive influence we can bring to the church and to those we work with. Those 2 front lines, I think we should keep in mind moving forwards. I think Justin's given us much to chew on and mull over. I recommend that you read his survey as well if you haven't seen it already. It's available on the Christians and Science website. Thank you also to all of you for your questions and comments. Thank you for engaging with us so well this evening. Our next meeting will be on Monday, the 2nd of November at 7 p.m. again. where we'll be joined by Dr. Rhoda Hawkins, who is a biophysicist at the University of Sheffield. Rhoda will be speaking to us on the theme of order and disorder, and that meeting will be chaired by Professor Peter Budd. A link to register for this event will shortly go up on our Eventbrite page, so please keep checking back there to find that link. If you want to keep in touch with us and see what other events are coming up, please follow our Eventbrite page, but you can also sign up for our local group mailing list. The email address for that is sec.cismanchester@yahoo.co.uk, or it can be found on the Manchester page of the CIS website. We have 2 more events planned for this term and are hoping to release details for next term soon. We also are due to host a conference here in Manchester on the topic of digital theology in the church in the first half of next year, but we suspect that might well be moving online as well, and we'll keep you posted on that. But there are several fascinating topics and speakers lined up for that event, covering everything from social media to virtual humans and digital immortality. So we'll keep you informed about how to log in and register for that. So this concludes tonight's session. Thank you all very much for coming, and we'll look forward to seeing you next month on Monday, the 2nd of November. Thank you for joining with us.